Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Marked twice, loved once. Episode 4. Chapter 36. Nora's POV. The drive wasn't silent. Instead, the young man kept talking about Vera, and I couldn't help but hum and drop a suggestion when needed. He introduced himself as Christopher, a vampire by birth. Vampire by birth? I asked, shocked by the revelation since I thought he was human. Are you surprised? He asked while his gaze was fixed on the road. I didn't get the signs, I murmured while he smiled but didn't say a word. Where do you think he is taking you? Lolita asked. I have no idea, I responded, regretting why I decided to come with him. After a few minutes' drive, he honked and drove through a black gate and into an estate, where he showed his ID to the men at the entrance. They let us through, and as we drove deeper into the estate, I realized this was no ordinary house. It was an expansive estate that I never knew existed in this town. As he parked the car, he gestured for me to follow him. I stepped out of the car and followed him through a winding path that led us to a large open space where loud music was blasting, and a car race was happening. Car race? I asked, surprised at the sight before me. Yeah, Christopher replied with a smirk. I'm part of the racing crew that organizes these events. It's kind of a secret society, you know. Only a select few know about it. I looked around in awe as the cars whizzed past us, their engines roaring as they competed for the top spot. The crowd was cheering and shouting, their excitement palpable in the air. You're part of this? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the scene before me. Christopher nodded, a mischievous glint in his eye. Yeah, it's my little secret. I've been doing this for years, and I'm pretty good at it, if I do say so myself. As I watched the cars race past us, I couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline rush through my body. The thrill of the race was infectious, and I found myself wanting to join in on the action. Do you ever race? I asked, turning to Christopher. He chuckled. I have before, but I mainly stick to organizing and overseeing the events now. But who knows, maybe one day you'll see me out there again. I smiled, still in awe of the hidden world that had just been revealed to me. I never knew something like this existed in our town, I said. Christopher shrugged. That's the beauty of it. It's a little secret that only a select few get to be a part of. And now, you're one of them. He smiled and waved at someone in the other lane. Stay here, I'll be back. He said and left. Thrilled and excited, I watched different sports cars racing against each other, but then I felt a tap on my shoulder, turned, and realized it was a man putting on a black face cap that covered most of his face, including his eyes. Mate! Lolita howled in my head, making me realize it was Alpha Leo. Alp, I tried speaking, but he touched his lips, signaling me to keep quiet. With a gulp, I stared at him, wondering why he was here, disguising himself with a face cap. He moved and stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the race. What are you doing here? He asked through telepathy, but I didn't respond. I heard him groan, grip my left wrist, and drag me along with him. I wanted to yell at him, but I decided not to draw attention to us. He pulled me into a corner and slammed my back against the wall. His two hands were placed above each side of me. I looked up at him, but I couldn't see his eyes because of the face cap. Do you know how dangerous this place is? He asked, sounding angry and irritated. Who brought you here? He asked while I stared at him, confused by his behavior. This is just a car race and nothing, I tried to speak, but he cut me off. You think so? Not only are you annoying, but you are also foolish. He cursed beneath his breath, and no matter how much I wanted to speak back to him, I just couldn't. With a heavy sigh, he took his hands away from the wall and ran his fingers through his hair, frustrated. Hard drugs are sold in bulk here, he said, while I stared at him with wild eyes, dumbfounded by what I had just heard. Not just any hard drugs, but F1. They are really harmful to werewolves. If a werewolf takes an overdose of it, it might kill their wolves. Some werewolves do take it but make sure not to overdose on it. We have been tracking the bulk seller. Through him, we could get to the main people behind these drugs. My sources confirmed the bulk seller was here, and I came here myself to confirm who it was so there won't be any mistakes, he explained while I listened closely. We would have raided this place but decided just to catch the person, so tell me, what are you doing here? He asked, but I didn't respond. You won't talk? He asked while I frowned and looked away. With an irritated groan, he turned his back to me and remained silent for a moment before looking my way. I have a job for you. Follow me, he said, and without waiting for my response, he began walking away, and I had no choice but to follow him. We returned to the racetrack, and I noticed him scanning the crowd, searching for someone until his gaze fell on a particular man. That man over there, he said, gesturing for me to follow his gaze. The one with the black buttoned shirt. I want you to seduce him and get information from him, he said so casually, like it was nothing. Seduce him? I asked, unsure of what I had just heard. Yes, he buys in bulk from the seller, and I want you to ask him to show you to the seller. Tell him you want to sell it in school, he said, while I scoffed and shook my head. You must be joking, I said, with disbelief. I'm not joking, and I don't joke, he spoke firmly, with no form of mischief in his voice. Are you serious about this? I asked, confused. Yes, I can't use anyone else because it would be suspicious, but with you, he will never get a clue, he said while I glared at him, wondering if he was insulting me. I'm not doing it, I said, firmly, looking away. It's not a choice, Nora, as your alpha, I'm commanding you, and you will do it, he ordered, his tone leaving no room for arguments. I stared at him and then back at the man who was having a conversation with a lady, probably wooing her. I don't think I'm his type, I grumbled while staring at the woman he was talking to. When it comes to X, no man has a type, he replied, making me gulp nervously as I frowned at him. So what happens if he takes me to the bulk seller? I asked, scared of what I was getting myself into. Tell him you'd like to buy some pills, he suggested, pausing to pull out some cash. This will be enough to buy a few bottles. He placed the cash in my hands and looked away before I could respond. This is insane, Lolita grumbled as I cursed myself for agreeing to come here. He's about to leave, start walking, he instructed as I nervously made my way to the other side of the track. I spotted him talking to another woman and Lolita encouraged me, you can do this. With a deep breath, I approached him and greeted him with a wave. Hi. He turned towards me and gazed at me for a moment before speaking, how may I assist you, beautiful? He said with a smirk, completely ignoring the lady beside him. I stuttered, not sure what to say. You needn't feel shy or scared, he reassured me with a friendly smile. Are you new around here? I inquired. No, he replied, shifting his attention to me. I am, though, I muttered, noticing him nodding. You're trembling, stop it, Alpha Leo's voice boomed in my head. Is there something I can help you with? He asked, and I nodded with a gulp. I need to purchase several bottles of F1, I whispered, and saw him furrow his brow at me. Who informed you that they sell it here? He asked, suspicion crossing his features. A dealer, he told me I could buy it in bulk here, I answered, and watched as he fell silent for a moment before leaning towards my left ear. I'll take you to him, but I will have you for the night, he whispered, his words sending shivers down my spine. He stepped back and locked his gaze with mine, waiting for a response. What did he say? Alpha Leo demanded through our mind link. That he wants to have relation with me, I replied, uncertain. Agree to it, Alpha Leo instructed without hesitation. Nora's POV. How he still had the audacity to boss me around and want me to help after everything he had done to me baffled me. Worse of all, despite asking me to do something as difficult as this, he wasn't even showing any respect. He still sounded so bossy. I shook my head, I can't do it, it's not my type of thing. I told him through mind link, and I heard him scoff in my head. So tell me, what do you do? Be useless to all? I'm your alpha, Nora, and as such, you'll do as I say. Accept it, now. He ordered, and I closed my eyes. Fear was getting the best of me, I would have never imagined doing something like this, but then, remembering that my safety wasn't even guaranteed, I stopped. And what will happen to me? Will I have relation with a stranger because you want me to help? I asked again. You fool, I thought that you'd at least be sensible. Of course, you won't have to. I doubt he'd even be interested in you. Listen to me and listen well. I'm here, my men are too, so not to worry, you won't have to do anything. Just get to the man. He said, and I shut my eyes. After making sure that I had the amount of reassurance that I needed, I agreed. So, will you do it? He asked me, and I nodded my head. I had no choice, no excuses either, as Alpha Leo had assured my safety. Yes, I will, I told him, and he smirked as he looked around. Good girl. Now, come with me. He said, and I swallowed as he grabbed my hand. I turned to look at Alpha Leo, making sure my eyes carried as much anger as they did. I also made sure that alongside the anger my eyes held, they held the "don't forget to keep your word" look too. I stood, transfixed, outside the building. I never knew a place like this existed, and it was really shocking to see it. It was such a beautiful place, yet it was so hidden. I turned to the man. Weren't we supposed to go get some bottles of F1? I asked him. Since F1 was such a dangerous drug that could harm wolves and the dealer wasn't one who wanted to make himself known to all, I had been expecting that he would be in some shady basement, but surprisingly, he wasn't. I swallowed since the man didn't give any response. I immediately knew this was the place. You're sure about your decision? There's no going back after this. He reaffirmed, and I closed my eyes. Personally, I wasn't even willing to do this, and it seemed Alpha Leo read my mind. Stop thinking and just say yes already, opportunities like these aren't easy to come by. He yelled in my head and I closed my eyes. Damn, why'd he have to yell? I managed to forge a smile as I stared at the man. I am certain, don't worry. I told him with a smile. It's not all about being sure, it's about being trustworthy. If you should let out the secret of this place to anyone. He started to move closer to me, and I stepped back until I had my back against the wall and I swallowed hard. Trust me, it'll be the end of you. He said in a very serious tone. The end. I gasped, and at that moment, Alpha Leo spoke again. Stop acting so scared, he'll know something is fishy. Alpha Leo bawled at me, and most times, I couldn't help but wonder if this man forgot he was in my head and, as such, was extremely loud. Of course, I know. You can trust me, don't worry about anything. I told him with a smile, and he nodded, and before I knew it, he pushed the door open, and just then, we walked into the building. I stared in awe at how beautiful the house was, and just then, he pushed a board over and typed a code in, and I gasped, such secrecy. The house was already very secret, so what was the need for all these? I swallowed as I stood in a dark room before a masked man on a chair in the middle. And who is she? His hoarse voice filled the room. The one who'd brought me turned to me, gesturing for me to answer, and I smiled. Nora. I'm interested in some bottles of F1. I told him. My hands were shaking, but I had to be strong, I needed to stand still, be strong and answer this man. He asked me many questions, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was an interview. Luckily, Alpha Leo was able to converse with me through Mind Link, and I was able to answer all of this man's questions. That's great. He'll take you to get the bottles. He turned to the man beside me and made a little gesture. I swallowed, and with that, they handed some bottles to me before we started to head out. As we stood outside the building, I couldn't help but swallow hard. At this point, I knew it was time. I had agreed to have relation with this man, and since he had already kept his part of the deal, he would want me to keep mine. Alpha Leo, we are out, where are you? I asked in panic through Mind Link but didn't get a signal from him. I spoke in fear and tried again, but no signal from him. He deceived us. Lolita asked, furious, while I swallowed hard as the man smirked before directing me to his car. Please, where are you, Alpha Leo? I asked through Mind Link, fear gripping my entire being. Nora. I heard a voice in my head, and just as I was about to heave a sigh of relief, I realized it was Lord Madison. Lord, as I was about to reply, I heard a voice behind me. And where are you going? Nora's POV. I turned to see Alpha Leo standing behind me, and my joy knew no bounds. I heaved a sigh of relief, finally. I was so scared at that moment, and immediately I saw Alpha Leo, I calmed down, at least I wouldn't have to make out with a complete stranger. I was still feeling relieved when suddenly, Alpha Leo put his hands around my waist. I stared at him, shocked, and it seemed like the shock was still coming in when he tucked my hair behind my ear, planting a little kiss on my cheek. Babe, what were you thinking, leaving me? I was so worried about you. He said as he started to examine me. I stared at him, shocked. I couldn't even speak as I was confused. What was going on with him? Why was he suddenly acting this way? Did he have a drink? These questions kept ringing in my head as he acted as if he cared about me. He didn't even let me speak when he placed another kiss on my forehead. Don't do this again, babe. I was so freaking worried about you. Where did you even go? Come on, let's go home. You made me so worried about you. He said, and I stared at him, shocked. Since when did Alpha Leo suddenly start to show so much care for me? From what I knew, Alpha Leo didn't even like me, so why was he suddenly doing all these things for me? Worst of all, even though I'd always wanted to know how it felt to be loved, it coming from Alpha Leo just felt so strange, especially at a place like this. Come on, babe. Let's go. He told me, leading me away when the man suddenly held onto my hand. And where do you think you're taking her? He asked as he pulled me back to himself, and I swallowed as I turned back to Alpha Leo, wondering what he would do. Ignoring the man, Alpha Leo grabbed my hand again as he took me with him, leading me away again when the man held onto my hand again, stopping him. "She's booked for the night, man. She agreed to come with me, and as you can see, we've got plans," he said, and I swallowed. Alpha Leo stared at him, scoffed before grabbing my hand again, and this time, the man still didn't relent. "Didn't you hear me? We've got plans," he said, and before I knew it, Alpha Leo shoved me to the side as he sent 2 punches right into the man's stomach, causing him to fall to the ground, unconscious immediately. I gasped as I stared at the man who had now fallen unconscious, and I swallowed before raising my head to Alpha Leo. How strong was he that with just 2 punches, he could knock this man out? "Shall we?" he asked, not sounding very vocal, but I heard him. At that point, I still couldn't bring myself to move freely with this man because the thought of him being able to knock another out with just 2 punches scared me. He led me to a car that was parked around there, and I stared at him, shocked. For this car to be here, it meant that while I was struggling to get through to him through mind link, he could see me. I gave a little frown, which I was sure he didn't care to notice. This man just got me scared, and all for what? Nothing. It seemed the day was just going to be full of more surprises for me because he opened the passenger's seat for me before going over to his side. Immediately he got in, I passed the drugs over to him. I didn't know how dangerous these things were, and as such, I couldn't keep them for so long, for my safety at least. "Here you go," I told him as I placed them on his lap, and after rearranging them, he turned to me. "Tell me, what did the man look like?" he asked. "Which man? Didn't you just see him?" I asked him. He rolled his eyes. "Not that one. The one who I had asked you to go see, the main dealer," he said, and I swallowed. "Oh, I didn't know," I said as I put my seat belts around me. I took a deep inhale before continuing to speak. "I don't really know because he was masked and..." "He was masked?" Alpha Leo interrupted me, and I nodded. "Go on." I nodded. He had this scary voice, not really a hot voice that can send shivers down your spine, but a voice one that can make you scared for your life. He seemed average in height, but I wouldn't know that since he was seated. Also, he asked way too many questions. I said. "Is that all the information you've got about him?" he asked me, and I took a deep inhale before nodding. "Unfortunately, yes," I said, and he nodded, and just as he started the car, about to drive off, I remembered something. "Wait, there's one more thing," I called his attention, and he turned to him. "What is it?" he asked. In his hand there seemed to be a mark on his left hand, and it seemed like an insect bite, I told him, and he rested his head on the seat's headrest. "I think I know who it is," he said, and I turned away. I didn't want to get even more involved in this. He kept silent for a moment before saying, "Don't read meaning to what I did out there, it was just an act." His words shattered my heart, but I composed myself and looked outside the window. He started the car, and all through the drive back to my house, neither of us said a word except for Lolita howling in my head. She couldn't get past the kiss Alpha Leo placed on my cheek. We were both very quiet, and when we finally got to my house, I opened the car's door. I frowned as I got out, and just as I was about to leave, he called out to me. "Nora." I bent to his level as I placed my head in the window. "Yes, Alpha." He sighed, "Thank you," he told with a frown like he was forced to say it. I stared at him, shocked. Alpha Leo's POV. I watched her walk into her house and I couldn't help but frown at myself. I was acting strange, and I had even thanked her? I gave myself a little slap as I shook my head. I wasn't supposed to act this way. I parked my car and I rested my head on the headrest. I was so tired, and I needed to get some rest. I walked out of the car as I walked into the house, and there I found Madison in the living room, resting his head, and even though it seemed like he was asleep, I knew he wasn't. I sighed as I took a seat opposite him, resting my head as I closed my eyes. My head had started to ache, and I knew it was because I was very stressed. "Tell me, what do you have with Nora?" Madison asked, getting me out of my slumber. I opened my eyes and raised my brows slightly as I stared at him. "And what's that supposed to mean? What gives you the right to ask me such a question?" I asked him, anger becoming evident in my voice. "Just answer the question, Leo. What's the relationship between you and Nora?" he asked, and just as I was about to speak, something hit me. Perhaps he was suspecting something, and that's not good. I got up. I wouldn't be able to answer these questions, so what was the need of staying here with Madison? I ran my fingers through my hair slightly and sighed heavily before walking away. I heard him scoff as I made my way for my room. I opened the door to my room as I walked in, locking the door behind me before going to the bed and then crashing into it. I sighed as I closed my eyes. Why was my head aching so badly? I rolled on the bed as I sat upright, running my fingers through my hair as I buried my face in my hands. What was happening to me? I was never this stressed, so what was happening now? Sluggishly, I got off the bed and walked to the bathroom, turning the water to warm as I started to take a bath. I was so weak that I found myself resting my back on the wall while I bathed. What was wrong with me? These things never happened to me, so what changed now? I took a deep inhale as I scrubbed my body. As the water drizzled down my body, only one person was on my mind, Nora. I closed my eyes. Why was I thinking about her now? I turned the water off as I wiped my face, placing my elbow against the wall. I never thought of anyone while taking a shower, not even my past lovers, so why was I suddenly thinking about Nora? I turned the water back on as I thought it would help me, and it did, for a while at least. I tied a towel around my waist and walked back into the room. I took out a plain shirt and trousers and changed into them before falling back to bed. I sighed deeply as I closed my eyes, and before I knew it, I drifted to sleep. While in my sleep, my wolf kept muttering only one word, "Mate. Stop this, I don't like her." I tried to shun my wolf, but then, as usual, it had a mind of its own, and it didn't stop. "You're getting attracted to Nora, admit it. You are a mate, so no one will hate you for liking her," he told me again. "Stop this nonsense now. If you have nothing to say or ways to ease my uneasiness, shut up. It's better to be useless than be a pain causer," I told my wolf in anger. I knew that wasn't the most appropriate way to speak to my wolf, but I was already so furious at this point, and this was the only way to speak to him when he kept bugging me. I knew my wolf could probably shut me away for this, but at that moment, the only thing that came to mind was, "Go to hell." I managed to calm myself, and before I knew it, I drifted to sleep. The buzzing of my phone woke me up from my sleep. With a groan, I checked the caller and instantly picked up the call. "Are you for real?" I asked. "Yes, Alpha, we've gotten the masked man," my man over the phone spoke, and I smiled to myself. It was time I showed him I wasn't one to be messed with. I put the phone on flight mode and closed my eyes again, this time drifting to sleep completely. Ah! I yawned as I stretched on the bed, the light from the sun getting into my eyes and disturbing my sleep. I raised my head to stare at the wall clock, and it was at that moment I jumped out of bed. It was Mum's birthday. I quickly had a brush as I rushed downstairs, wishing Mum a very happy birthday. She was delighted to see me, and it made me glad to know that she was pleased. "Thank you so much, Leo," she said with a smile, and at that moment, different guests began to troop in, and I excused myself. For the rest of the day, I just stayed in my room behind closed locked doors, working. I didn't feel like conversing with most of the people there, so obviously, work was the only option. I sighed as I ran my fingers through my hair, staring at the document before me. I had to admit, it was all very tiring and boring, but then, it was better than having to stay standing in one corner for the rest of the day. Good. I commended myself as I stared at the amount of work I had worked on. It was while I was still admiring my masterpiece that I heard a knock at my door. "Who is it?" I asked as I ran my fingers through my hair. "Greetings, Alpha Leo. I have come to inform you that more guests have arrived, and hence, your presence is needed," the maid said, and I nodded. Go, I'll be there soon," I grumbled and stood to my feet. I took a suit, one that suited me very well, before getting into it, combing my hair, and then walking out. Everything was like I'd foretold. Guests were conversing, Mum was busy with her friends, the maids were doing their jobs, but only one person seemed to be doing more than she was supposed to, Vera. She was welcoming the guests like she was the daughter-in-law or the celebrant, laughing out loud with them, and for some reason, it didn't really sit well with me. At one moment, her gaze fell on me, and she excused herself as she approached me. "Greetings, Alpha Leo," she greeted, lowering her head with respect. "You look very handsome," she said with a smile on her face, and I nodded as I tried to look away from her while she continued to smile sheepishly. "Thanks. Now, if you would please, excuse me, I need to be somewhere," I told her with a smile as I took her hand off my shirt before walking away. I took a glass of wine from the server and took a sip of it. As I took another sip, something suddenly hit me. I wasn't feeling the party, and it was because I was feeling that someone who was supposed to be here wasn't. I released a heavy sigh as I finished the drink before starting to move around, scanning my eyes as I tried to find the one I was seeking. I kept on looking when my eyes suddenly got fixed at the door, and there and then, she walked in, drawing my attention to her. Nora's POV, our eyes met, and I could see the stunned look on his face. It seemed he was surprised to see me dressed so gorgeously. "He is staring at us," Lolita spoke excitedly while I tucked my hair behind my ears. But then I saw Vera walk to him and hold his arm before placing a kiss on his cheek. I gulped and looked away before leaving the door. I met some workers and exchanged greetings as I made my way to Lady Christabel with a wrapped gift in my hand. I didn't know what to get her because I knew she had the best clothes, shoes, and bags, but after much thinking, I decided to get a novel that I knew she would love. I got to where she stood with other guests and waited for her to finish attending to them. "Nora, you're here," she spoke excitedly. "I've been searching for you. I thought you wouldn't make it," she said with a relieved smile, showing she was happy to see me. "I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world," I said and received a big smile. "Happy birthday to you, ma'am," I said while stretching out my hand to give her my gift. "I got you this, I do hope you'll like it," I said and saw a grateful smile on her face as she took the gift and gave me a quick hug. "Thank you, of course, I would love it," she assured me while I smiled and moved away for other guests to talk to her. I took a glass of wine from the server and scanned around the room, staring at the caliber of people at the party. By their clothes and jewelry, one wouldn't need to be told there were people of a higher class. While moving my gaze around, my eyes fell on Lord Madison. He was standing with a man, and they were conversing. As if he knew I was staring, I noticed he looked my way and held my gaze for a second but instantly looked away. What did I do wrong? I asked Lolita but didn't get a response from her. Attention, everyone! Lady Christabel spoke, calling the attention of everyone in the hall. I want to thank you all for sharing in my celebration, she said, and got applauded. This year's birthday is a joyful one for me because my son, your Alpha, has found his mate. She spoke, and everyone clapped happily while I gulped and sipped my drink. Come, my dear, let me show you to everyone. She spoke and gestured for Vera to join her on the stage. Heartbroken, I watched her leave Alpha Leo's side and majestically walk to the stage. She is beautiful, a lady beside me whispered to a man who stood by her. Very correct, and has the aura of a potential Luna, the man added, and I gulped, ignoring their words. She reached the stage and flickered a big smile to everyone. Lolita cursed. Isn't she beautiful? Lady Christabel asked, and everyone agreed with her. I stared at Alpha Leo, who held my gaze for a second before looking away. Unable to stand all the things Lady Christabel was saying, I decided to go outside and get some fresh air, and perhaps before I returned, she would be done. I exited the living room and strolled to the garden with a glass of wine in my hand. I felt hot tears stream down my cheek, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. I thought I was used to all this, but I was wrong, I could never get past this pain. I heard footsteps behind me, turned, and saw Alpha Leo approaching me. He had an expressionless look on his face as he held my gaze. He got to where I stood and stopped a few steps away from me. Why are you here? I asked with anger and pain. Really? He scoffed, this is my house, and I can be wherever I want to be, and you have no right to ask me such. He responded, causing my anger to boil. Why? I asked, tears blurring my eyes. For goddess's sake, I'm your mate. Why would you tell people it's my sister? I yelled in tears and got an angry groan from him. You are not my type. He yelled. You are fat, unattractive, and ugly. He spat at my face, causing my wolf to whine in pain. Comments like this weren't new to me. I got them almost all the time, but this time, it hurt even more, as this time, it wasn't just my heart that clenched but my wolf too. No more! I shouted, my voice ringing with determination and pain. Vera has taken everything from me, my mother's love, my friends, my boyfriends, and now you. I deserve to have something that is truly mine, and I won't let her take it away too. I don't care if you think I'm nothing special, but I know I'm worthy of love and someday I'll have it. I yelled in tears, and without waiting for a response, I walked away. I went back to the party, took my jacket from where I kept it, and just when I was about to leave, I met eyes with Lord Madison, and this time he didn't look away. Instead, he held my gaze. I felt a droplet of tears fall on my cheek and quickly looked away, so he wouldn't see me crying. I left the party and hurried towards the gate, but the voice of Lord Madison in my head stopped me. Stop! He spoke with so much authority that I found myself obeying. With a deep sniffle, I turned around and saw him approaching me with a blank look. As he walked to me, he didn't lose eye contact with me until he got to where I stood. He held my gaze for a moment, and despite how hard I tried to stop the tears from falling, they kept falling. Why the tears? He asked, his voice demanding. I couldn't respond to his question. Instead, I continued crying, not minding that Lord Madison was standing in front of me. "What happened?" he demanded again, this time with an authoritative tone. I sniffled and took a deep breath before lifting my gaze to meet his, which was filled with curiosity. "Am I that unappealing?" I asked, eliciting an angry groan from him. Embarrassed by my question, I lowered my eyes to the ground, but Lord Madison lifted my chin with a gentle touch of his finger, his intense gaze locking onto my tear-filled eyes. I struggled to compose myself, trying to hide the pain of the hurtful words that had been spoken to me. "Who said such cruel things to you?" he asked in a soft and comforting voice. I couldn't find the strength to speak, my throat constricted with emotion. "Don't worry," Lord Madison whispered, his face calm and impassive. "Let's make them regret their words." His words were laced with a subtle hint of danger, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement at the thought of him taking revenge on my behalf. "Stop crying," he said firmly, "and wipe away those tears." I felt embarrassed as he reached out and gently brushed his thumbs across my cheeks, wiping away the salty drops. "It's all right," he reassured me. "I'm here to help." I tried to compose myself, taking deep breaths to control the sobs that threatened to take over. Lord Madison stood patiently before me, his hands still cupping my face. Finally, I regained control and looked up at him with a grateful smile. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded understandingly. "Sometimes we all need to express our emotions, but remember, you're stronger than you think." He released my face and stepped back, giving me space and privacy to collect myself. "The party isn't over yet, so let's go inside," he said, not waiting for my response as he took hold of my hand and led me back into the party. I could feel his firm grip and the warmth of his palm against mine. The music was loud and upbeat, and people were laughing and chatting, but all I could focus on was the feeling of his hand in mine. "Dance with me," he said, and I nodded shyly, feeling my cheeks flush. He placed my hands on his broad shoulders and wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me closer to him. I could feel the strength of his muscles through his suit jacket. "I don't really know how to dance," I spoke shyly, feeling a bit self-conscious about my lack of dancing skills. Lord Madison scoffed at my words, a smile playing on his lips as he leaned towards my left ear. "Follow my steps," he whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. With that, he took the first step, and I followed. I moved in perfect harmony with him, following his lead as he twirled me around the dance floor. I felt my worries melt away as I lost myself in the music and the moment. As we danced, I couldn't help but notice the many eyes watching us, including that of Alpha Leo. "Who just stepped in?" His dark gaze burned through me, causing me to feel a sudden chill up my spine. Lord Madison noticed my discomfort and pulled me closer to him, shielding me from the stares of others. "Let them watch," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight, you're mine, and I want to dance with you." Nora's POV, "Stay calm," he urged as I gulped and nodded. I followed his steps, but then I realized that many eyes were still on us, making me worried and self-conscious. "Don't you notice something odd?" I asked, and he furrowed his eyebrows, gesturing for me to go on. "I think everyone is staring at us, or should I say you? They stare at us like we're doing something wrong," I said, getting a scoff from him. "Of course, they will stare. I'm already used to people talking about me," he spoke nonchalantly while I nodded. "But we can actually give them something to talk about," he spoke with a mischievous grin, getting me confused. "Perhaps if I kiss you, then there will be enough topic to go around," he teased, and I gulped and shyly looked away. I heard a low chuckle from him as he let go of my waist. "Walk with me," he said while I gave him that "Are you sure" look. "Come with me," he urged after noticing my hesitation. "Sure," I nodded and walked beside him. He took 2 drinks from the server, gave one to me, and I took a sip of it. I moved my gaze around and met Alpha Leo's gaze. He looked at me with different emotions mixed up in his face. I could see hurt, anger, regret, and sadness, but the one I could sense the most was anger. "Maybe we should leave," Lolita whispered in my head, but I kicked against it. "I'm not leaving this party because of him." "Greetings, Lord Madison," a man in a black suit greeted as he stood before us, "Senator James." Lord Madison greeted with a handshake. "It's been a while," the senator replied while stealing a glance at me. "I've been busy lately," Lord Madison responded, and the senator nodded before holding my gaze. "Nice meeting you, beautiful damsel," he said while taking my hand and placing a kiss on it. "Greetings, Senator James," I greeted as he let go of my hand. "Has anyone told you that you have a really nice hand? It is soft and puffy," he praised while I smiled and shyly tucked my hair behind my left ear. "I believe you are here to talk business with me. Why don't you go straight to the point?" Lord Madison spoke, obviously irritated by Senator James' presence. Typical Lord Madison, always going straight to the point, Senator James chuckled, and Lord Madison didn't find it funny because he responded with a groan, and Senator James understood. "I will go straight to the point, but I think we should discuss this more privately," he suggested, but Lord Madison shook his head. "You can say whatever you want to say right here," he spoke firmly. Senator James stared at me for a moment before releasing a heavy sigh. "I have an offer for you," he spoke, and Lord Madison gestured for him to go on. "My sister is young, beautiful, and unmarried. I have come to offer her hand in marriage," he spoke and waited for Lord Madison, who didn't say a word for almost a minute. I looked his way and could see he was fuming in anger but was doing his best not to explode. "I know it's still early to get married, but I'm just dropping a proposal in case you think of getting remarried," he spoke nervously and quickly walked away without waiting for a response. I looked at Lord Madison and noticed that he was really furious. He was so lost in thought that I wondered what he was thinking. We remained silent while I took a sip of my drink. I wanted to speak but held myself. I didn't want to anger him with my words. As we stood in silence, I gazed at the party and watched Vera cling beside Alpha Ricardo as he talked to the guests. "Wait for me here, when I come we will be leaving," he said to me before leaving. I watched him return to the senator and wished I could hear what he was saying. "I believe you are enjoying the party," Lady Emma's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see her wearing a warm smile on her face. "Yes, it's a nice party," I responded, and she nodded in agreement. "So has he told you yet?" she asked while staring in Lord Madison's direction. "Told me what?" I asked, confused. "Lord Madison is going back to his country first thing tomorrow," she announced, causing my breath to seize in my chest. "Are you sure about this?" "I mean, he was supposed to stay here for at least 2 months, I tried speaking, but she cut in, "We are just workers, we don't know anything apart from what I have just told you," she said, and I gulped, watching him talking to Senator James. "I thought he must have told you," she said, giving me a suspicious look, but I didn't give a response. "All right, I'll take my leave." She left, leaving me alone in my thoughts. "He is leaving," Lolita grumbled, and I couldn't respond, rather I watched him continue talking to Senator James. Without shaking hands, he left him and walked up to me. I noticed he was no longer angry but only had an expressionless look on his face. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked, and I nodded. "I'll drop you off," he said, and I nodded with a weak smile. While I followed him out of the party, I noticed Alpha Leo staring at me from across the room. His gaze was filled with anger, making me feel uneasy. With a gulp, I walked out of the party and tried to avoid eye contact with Lord Madison as I entered his car. Lord Madison got into the driver's seat and started the car, his face expressionless. The silence between us was palpable. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't dare to look at him. I was afraid of what he might see. Finally, Lord Madison spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Are you okay?" he asked, and I quickly nodded. As he drove out of the mansion, I couldn't help but think of what Lady Emma had just told me. He was leaving, and I just couldn't accept it. "Ask him about it," Lolita urged, but I wouldn't dare. The drive was silent until he pulled up in front of our apartment. "Thanks for the ride," I said, trying to speak, but he cut in. "What is it?" he asked demandingly. "I don't understand your question," I said, not looking his way. "You've been quiet since I came back. Is something wrong, or did someone say something to you?" he asked, and I couldn't give a response. We both remained silent, and when I was not able to stand it, I quickly left the car, but couldn't move. It felt like my legs were stuck to the ground, and just then, I heard Lord Madison get out of the car and walk over to me. "Turn around," he commanded, and obediently I complied, but I avoided holding his gaze. "Eyes up," he ordered, and I gulped before meeting his expressionless face. "What is it?" he demanded, and despite my attempt to whisper, the hurt in my voice still seeped through. "Are you truly leaving?" I asked, scared of the possibility. "Is that why you are in this mood?" he asked, and I didn't know what to say. Not getting a response from me, he took another step closer to me, and without warning, he cupped my face and smacked his lips with mine. I tried to push him away, but he held me tightly, deepening the kiss. He pressed me to himself, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body, sending tingling sensations down my stomach. As his kiss got more intense, I could feel the last wall of resistance I had built crumbling. My body became weak and needy, and I couldn't resist him anymore. Lolita howled disapprovingly in my head, but I ignored it. He wrapped his hand around my waist and pulled me close, deepening the kiss more. I could hear my subconscious mind screaming and scolding me to stop, but I was too lost in the pleasure to listen. We continued to kiss, earning a moan from me. His touch alone was enough to make me moan. I couldn't help but want more. I parted my lip a bit, and he used that as an opportunity to slip his tongue in, tasting each and every part of me. With my hands, I tangled his hair, our tongues fought for dominance while his hand roamed my body. We pulled away to catch our breaths, and just when I was about to comprehend what just happened, he spoke, "Look behind you." His words got me curious, and I turned around to see Alpha Leo with Vera. I gulped and turned to Lord Madison, who smirked. "I told you I would make them regret their words." He spoke, and then realization hit me. He didn't kiss me because he wanted to, but he did it just to spite Alpha Leo. Alpha Leo's POV mine. Ethan howled in my head, sending a series of anger through my entire body. I watched as he held onto her body and kissed her passionately and possessively like she belonged to him when she was mine and mine alone. As if they noticed my presence, she turned and held my gaze, and with terrified eyes, she looked away. "Slut!" Vera cursed, causing a heavy groan to leave my lips. "I told you she is," she tried speaking, but I ignored her and walked back to my car. As I drove off, I held a gaze with Lord Madison and noticed he gave me a challenging look, which boiled my blood. "Don't leave," Ethan urged, but I ignored him and drove off before I'll do something stupid. Images of them kissing played in my head, provoking me to slam the steering of the car. I was angry, frustrated, and jealous. "You are the cause of this," Ethan groaned in my head. "How could you just reject our mate without thinking? Abu, shut up, man!" I yelled, hitting the steering of the car. "I won't," he argued with a groan. "I want my mate. I don't care what you think about her, but to me, she is the most beautiful lady in the world." He howled loudly and shut himself away from me. I yelled and continued slamming the steering of the car. I was angry and just couldn't explain why I was so angry. I tried to shake off the thoughts of her in his arms, but they kept creeping back into my mind. The image of her soft lips on his, her body pressed against his, made me clench my fists tightly. As I drove on, I decided not to go back home in such a mood. So I parked my car in a corner of the road and walked into the woods. The flashlight of my phone led me until I got deeper into the woods and decided to shift into my wolf. I took off my clothes and easily shifted into my wolf. I raced around the woods while Ethan howled in pain and anger. He overpowered me and raced around the woods for hours until he got exhausted and decided to stop. I got back to my clothes, shifted back to my human form, and got dressed. I walked back to my car, got in and started the car, but I didn't drive back. Rather, I drove to Nora's home. I knew what I was about to do was a bad idea, but I just couldn't go back home. I checked the time on my phone and realized it was past 1 a.m., but I decided to drive on. "Nora." I called through the mind link and got a signal from her. "Alpha Leo?" she asked, unsure, causing an angry groan to leave my lips. She was my mate and was supposed to know it was me calling. "Come outside of your apartment, I'm almost there," I urged. "You," she tried speaking, but I cut in, "don't keep me waiting." With that, I ended the mind link. I continued driving while pondering in thoughts. I just couldn't explain why I was feeling this way just because Madison kissed her. She is not my type of mate, so I shouldn't worry about it, but here I was, feeling strange. I pulled up in front of the apartment and saw her coming out of the house. She was wearing a short nightwear that hugged her curves, and her hair was tousled and scattered all over her shoulders. Her eyes looked heavy with sleep, and she seemed to be rubbing them as if she was just waking up. Despite her sleepy appearance, she looked stunningly beautiful. With a groan, I stepped out of the car and stood before her. As she made her way towards me, I couldn't help but stare, despite trying my hardest not to. There was something about her that was captivating. Perhaps it was the way her nightwear hugged her curves or the way her hair fell over her shoulders. Or maybe it was just her vulnerability that drew me to her. "Mine," Ethan growled in my head, causing me to let out a heavy sigh. "You asked me out, is something wrong?" she asked, and I took a deep breath to compose myself before asking, "Why did you let him kiss you?" I demanded, watching her gulp. "You can't go around kissing men, especially when that man is a cousin to your mate and is still mourning his wife, but," she tried to cut in, but stopped. "But what?" I asked with a tinge of jealousy. "Don't you realize that he lost his wife and unborn child just 4 months ago?" I couldn't believe I was doing this, but I knew it was the only way to make her stop. "I'm not against you kissing other men," I lied, "but not Lord Madison," I muttered, watching her lower her head. "He is not himself, and whatever he is doing with you is just a way to distract himself from the pain he is going through." I spoke, and this time she responded. There is nothing between us. She tried to defend herself, but I cut her off. Then why did you kiss him and responded like you wanted it? I asked, my jealousy getting the better of me. Stop this, Ethan warned, but I didn't listen. As your alpha, I command you to stay away from him until his morning time is over. I said, watching her gulp. Do you understand? I asked, and she nodded slowly without meeting my gaze. You're a fool, Ethan cursed and locked himself away from me, but I knew he was right. I was acting foolishly, but I couldn't help it. Is that all? She asked, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wanted to tell her that she was mine and not allowed to kiss anyone else, but I knew I have no right to, so there was no point. This should stay between us, I said before turning and quickly leaving before I said or did something I might regret. As I drove to the mansion, I couldn't stop clenching the steering wheel. I was going insane, and I knew it. I parked the car in the garage and walked into the living room to find Madison sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in his hand. With a groan, I walked up to him and stood before him with clenched fists. What was that? I demanded, and he took a sip of his drink before raising an eyebrow. I don't understand what you're talking about, he said, taunting me. Of course you know what I mean, I groaned, my anger rising. Why did you kiss Nora? I spoke possessively, and he let out a soft chuckle before standing up and holding my gaze. I kissed her because I wanted to. Do you have a problem with that? He asked, raising his eyebrows and irritating me even more. Stay away from her, I demanded possessively, and heard him scoff before emptying the glass of wine into his mouth. And why should I do that? He asked, getting on my nerves. You know why, Madison. You know why I'm saying all this. You are not ignorant of what's happening, so stop behaving like you know nothing, I spoke, frustrated. Madison didn't respond right away, but when he did, his question cut me to the core. I really don't know, Leo. For all I know, she is not your mate. So, why should I stay away from her? Unless, of course, she is your mate. Is she? He asked, raising his eyebrows expectantly. His question hit me hard, and for a moment, I was at a loss for words. Madison's words had touched a nerve, and I realized that I was not entirely sure of my feelings for Nora. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't let Madison get close to her. Is she? He asked, waiting for a response from me, but I couldn't give any. Your silence means she is definitely not your mate, so you have no right to tell me to stay away from her. After all, you have a beautiful mate, who you're flaunting around like a trophy, proudly showcasing her to everyone. He grinned and walked away, causing anger and pain to rank my entire being. She is my mate, I whispered, only to my hearing. You are a fool, Leo. Ethan cursed. Nora's POV. As I dressed up the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about Alpha Leo's accusing words. No matter how hard I tried to get his words out of my head, I couldn't help but feel guilty for allowing Lord Madison to kiss me. To think that he did it just to spite Alpha Leo brought an unfamiliar feeling to my chest. You did nothing wrong, his wife is no more, Lolita tried comforting me, and it worked. You are right, and besides, there is nothing happening between us, I said and picked up my bag before leaving my room. As I descended the stairs, I overheard a familiar voice coming from the dining room. Out of curiosity, I hurried to the dining room and found Maxwell seated at the table. He smiled widely at me, revealing his beautifully arranged teeth. There she is, my favorite person in the world, he spoke as he stood up. With a weak smile, I stood at the spot as he left his seat and made his way to me. "It's been a long time," he spoke excitedly and gave me a hug, while I released a soft sigh as we pulled away. "I missed you. How have you been?" he asked, and I nodded with a weak smile. I noticed the worried look on his face, but he quickly wiped it and flickered a warm smile at me. "Come, let's have breakfast," he suggested, but I shook my head. I just couldn't have a meal at the same table as my mother. Every time I see her, she never fails to shoot that glare filled with hate and disgust. "Are you running late?" he asked, obviously noticing that I didn't want to have a meal with them. "I'll drive you to school." "Wait for me," he said and left me while I stared at my father, mother, and Vera at the table. They looked like one big happy family. I held my gaze with my father but looked away. I was angry and hurt that he didn't believe me when I told him I didn't do anything at the hotel. He picked up the car keys, and we both left the house. We got into the car, and he drove off. "I was expecting you at the end of the month," I spoke, bringing up a conversation. "I came because of you." "I'll be leaving by the end of the week," he spoke, and I nodded, relaxing my head on the car's headrest. The drive was silent until he spoke. "Father told me mother told you what happened years ago," he said while I sighed and closed my eyes. "I want to tell you it's not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself," he spoke while I sighed and opened my eyes. "Mother hates me and will never forgive me," I whispered with a heavy sigh. "I was a child, but mother will never see it that way," I sighed and looked at Maxwell. "I'm moving out. I can't stay in that house, it feels like I'm being suffocated in there," I grumbled, and Maximum nodded in agreement. "Do you want to come over to Francisco?" he asked. "I won't be coming back home," he announced, getting my attention. "I have gotten a good job offer in Francisco," he announced with a big smile. "That's good news," I responded happily, and he nodded. "Why don't you move to Francisco after your final exams?" he suggested, but I shook my head. "Not now. I don't want to leave the pack yet." "Is it because of him?" he asked, and I couldn't give him an answer. "You need to either reject him or let him reject you," he advised, but I looked away with uncertainty in my heart. "Leave all this behind and come to Francisco with me," he pleaded, but I didn't give him an answer because I had nothing to say. The drive fell silent until he spoke again. "Since you've decided to stay, then I'll look for an apartment for you," he said. I flashed him a grateful smile. Maxwell and I discussed other things throughout the drive until he pulled up in front of the school. "I'll be going to the mansion after my last class," I told Maxwell as I stepped out of the car. "Thanks for everything," I spoke gratefully and walked into the school. I found my usual spot and saw Dora already seated. "You're late," she spoke while throwing a suspicious look at me. "What?" I asked with a raised brow. "Tell me how the party went. I heard lots of politicians and alphas attended." "Is that true?" she asked, and I nodded, bringing out my laptop from my bag. "Wow, Vera is so lucky. I wonder what she must have done in her past life to have such favor," Dora spoke, but I ignored her and switched on my laptop. The lecture went on smoothly until the last class. After the last class, Dora suggested we go to her home, but I told her I needed to go back to work. We said our goodbyes, and I boarded a taxi to the mansion. When I arrived at the mansion, I took the keys from Lady Emma, and just as I was about to leave, her words stopped me. "Lord Madison has gone back," she spoke while holding my gaze, waiting to see my reaction. But I didn't say a word. Instead, I nodded and took the stairs. As I climbed the stairs, my heart became heavy, and it felt like I was about to cry, but I held myself together. I thought we had an understanding last night, but I was wrong. I arrived at the library, arranged and kept everything in its rightful place before taking my seat. "Are you okay?" Lolita asked, and I couldn't give a response. I was pained and angry. How could he leave without even saying a word to me? "You know he will surely leave one day," Lolita spoke, but I sighed and picked up a book. I tried to focus on the content of the book, but my thoughts kept drifting to him. I kept thinking about the kiss we shared and wondered if he left because he felt guilty about kissing me when he was supposed to mourn his wife and mate. I was still lost in my thoughts when the click of the door drew my attention to the entrance. I looked up and saw Alpha Leo walking in. He had my gaze, and I quickly stood to my feet. "Greetings," I greeted and lowered my head with respect. He stood calm and composed, his hands in the pocket of his pants, and his gaze fixed on me. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked, nervous by the way he was staring at me. "He is handsome," Lolita praised in my head, which I totally ignored. He didn't give a response to my question, rather, he still held my gaze with an unreadable expression on his face. "Is something," I tried speaking, but he cut me off. "I need a book recommendation, can you give any?" he asked in a tone I haven't heard him use on me. With furrowed eyebrows, I held his gaze to be sure it was actually him before me and not my imagination playing tricks on me. "Do you have any?" he asked, but when he didn't get a response, he repeated his question. Yes, I stammered and walked away from my desk. "It's a romance or, romance," he interrupted, holding my gaze with piercing eyes that made me nervous. "I have a good book," I continued, feeling my palms sweat. "It's called His Second Mate. I read it, and I think you'll like it." I made my way to the shelf where the fantasy books were kept and ran my fingers over each title until I found the book. As I reached out to grab it, I suddenly felt a presence behind me. I turned around and found Alpha Leo just an inch away from me. I was taken aback by how close he was, and I could feel his hot breath on my face. I could smell his cologne, a mix of musk and wood, which made my senses tingle. It was a strange feeling to be this close to Alpha Leo, especially since I had never been this close to him before. I looked up at him, surprised, and he returned my gaze with his steady green eyes. I could feel my heartbeat increasing as he stood there, so close that I could feel the warmth of his body against mine. "I think that's the book," he said, his voice low and unyielding. With a gulp, I tried to hand the book over to him, but the click of the door got my attention. Curious as to who was entering the room, I stretched my neck and was surprised to see Lord Madison walking in. Quickly, I shifted away from Alpha Leo, but it was already too late. Lord Madison had seen us so close, and the look on his face showed he was not happy about it. Lord Madison's POV, as I strode into the library, my eyes fell on Leo and Nora, standing close together. Anger boiled within me as I watched them, fearing that they might kiss. If I hadn't arrived when I did, who knows what might have happened. Nora greeted me, but I didn't respond. Instead, I held Leo's gaze, which blazed with anger. Obviously, he was angry at my arrival. "I'll come back later," I said, before storming out. Taking the stairs to the sitting room, I found Aunt chatting with a maid. When she saw me, she flashed me a big smile and approached me. "How was the meeting?" she asked. "Fine," I grumbled, my thoughts drifting back to the library. I could read Leo like a book, and the first day I saw how he acted with Nora, I realized something was fishy. I confirmed my suspicions after I questioned him and he couldn't give an answer. When I realized she was his mate, I became confused and couldn't understand why he would reject her. She was intelligent, beautiful, and kind-hearted. Maybe Leo was too focused on her body, which wasn't as slender as he preferred type of lady, but I found her curves alluring and natural. "Are you okay?" Ant's words brought me back from my thoughts. "Yes," I sighed, staring up at the stairs where Leo appeared, descending towards us. Our eyes locked, and I saw the challenge in his gaze, but I looked away. "I'll leave you two alone," Ant spoke as soon as Leo took the seat across from me. Neither of us spoke for a moment, but the tension between us was intense. Finally, Leo broke the silence. "What game are you playing?" he demanded, his eyes boring into mine. "I should be the one asking you that," I retorted, seeing the big frown on his face. "You know what I mean, Madison. What games are you trying to play?" he persisted, but I cut him off. "I'm not playing any games. You know me, Leo, I don't play games," I said, my voice firm and steady. He groaned in frustration. "Stay away from her, Madison," he growled. "And why should I?" I asked, anger rising within me. Once again, I got no answer. "You have no right over her, Leo. The only lady you can tell me to stay away from is Vera, and you'll never see me get close to her," I declared, locking eyes with him, waiting for his response. But he remained silent. He seemed unsure of his feelings towards Nora and didn't want me to be too close to her. Not able to withstand my interrogation, he stood up and walked away, leaving me without saying a word. I went into deep thought, trying to figure out why he was showing Vera to everyone when it was clear he wouldn't marry her. Not able to give myself an answer, I went to my room and took a cold bath. As I lay down on my bed, thoughts of my mate kept flashing in my mind. I missed her warm and charming smile, her beautiful set of teeth, and how she would tease me by calling me Lord Madison. "I miss you," I whispered to myself. Suddenly, I heard a knock on my door. I ignored it, thinking it was a maid asking about dinner. However, the knocking persisted, and I yelled, "I'm not hungry." The person knocking on the door didn't say anything, so I assumed they had understood. But the knocking continued, and I angrily asked, "Who is it? I just told you I don't wanna eat." "It's me, Nora," she said, and confusion crept into my mind. I walked to the door and opened it to see her standing there, looking nervous. "Why are you here?" I asked irritably, still remembering what I saw in the library. "I'm heading home and thought I should come and see you," she said, her voice trembling. I walked back into my room and sat on the couch, feeling cold towards her. She entered and shut the door behind her. "Yes?" I asked coldly. "What you saw was nothing. I was just trying to get a book for him," she said, trying to defend herself. "I didn't ask you. Why are you telling me?" I asked, cutting her off. "I just wanted to clear up the misunderstanding, so you wouldn't see me as someone who is flirting with her sister's mate," she mumbled. I chuckled and stood up. "Your sister's mate?" I asked as I walked towards her and stopped just a step away. "What did you think I meant when I said I would make them pay?" She gulped before speaking. "Because I'm being bullied." "Nonsense." I cut her off, and she gulped again. "Why did you think I kissed you in Alpha Leo's presence?" I asked, watching her go into deep thought for a moment before raising her gaze to meet mine with stunned eyes. "You," she trailed off. "Yes, I know. You two can fool everyone else, but not me," I said and saw her look away in pain. I could tell that she was sad that I knew that she was being rejected. "What happened?" Why is he telling everyone that Vera is his mate? I asked, noticing her hesitation before she lifted her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she was doing her best not to let them fall. Don't cry, I said. He doesn't deserve your tears. I urged, and saw her suck a deep breath before opening her mouth to speak. He says I'm not his type of mate, she whispered, causing an angry groan to escape my lips. He rejected me the very day he saw me. He was so ashamed to let anyone know I'm his mate. He didn't even get to know me, she whimpered, struggling to hold back her tears. He told me that if I tell anyone that we are mates, he would publicly and officially reject me. I don't want that to happen to my wolf, she explained while I sighed and walked over to the bar. I took out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. I returned to her and handed her a glass, which she took with a confused look. I filled up our glasses and took a sip before holding her gaze. Do you want him? I asked and saw her gulp but did not say a word. I asked a question, I demanded and saw her nod. Do you want him to come for you? I asked, and she gulped before whispering, he is my mate, and I believe we are meant to be together. I nodded, ignoring the discomfort in my chest. I took a sip of my drink and held her gaze. I can make him crawl back on his knees to you, but you have to do as I instruct, I spoke and saw her furrow her eyebrows confused. Whatever I do, you are going to play along with me and not ask questions, and I promise you that in less than 2 months, he will come begging for you to accept him, I said and saw the disbelief on her face. Can that really happen? She asked, and I nodded. Only if you do exactly as I instruct with no questions, I urged, and she went silent, deliberating if she should agree to it or not. Are you in? I asked after not getting a response from her. Yes, I'll do as you say. I believe I deserve to have something that is truly mine, she responded with desperation in her voice. Very well, then, this is your first test. Seduce me, I demanded and saw the dumbfounded look in her eyes. She stuttered for a moment, taken aback by my sudden request. What do you mean? She finally managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly. I took another sip of my drink and leaned closer to her, my eyes locking onto hers. I mean exactly what I said. Seduce me, I repeated, my tone firm and challenging. She hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of what to do. But after a few seconds of contemplation, she took a deep breath and leaned in towards me. She placed her hand on my chest and looked up at me with a seductive expression. I raised an eyebrow in surprise as she began to run her hand up and down my torso, her touch sending shivers down my spine. She leaned in even closer, her lips hovering just inches from mine. I could feel the heat emanating from her body, and my own heart rate began to quicken. I couldn't deny my body was reacting so quickly to her touch. It felt like all the dead organs in my body were jerking back to life. As she moved in to kiss me, I suddenly pulled back and held up a hand. That's enough, I said and stepped away, afraid that I might lose control. Nora's POV. You've passed the first test. Let's hope you can meet the other tests in the future, he said, while I gulped and looked away. I couldn't believe I had just tried to kiss him. Can I leave? I asked, and he remained silent for a moment before replying, I'll drive you back home. He flashed a quick smile and picked up his jacket from the couch. Shall we? He said and led me out of the room. As we took the stairs to the sitting room, I couldn't help but wonder what I had gotten myself into. I knew that what he had asked me to do in his room was just the tip of the iceberg of what he was about to make me do, and the thought of that frightened me. We got downstairs and found Lady Christabel and Alpha Leo in the sitting room, watching a documentary. Alpha Leo held my gaze, and I instantly looked away. "Stop being nervous whenever you see him," Lord Madison spoke through the mind link, forcing me to take a deep breath. "Nora, I thought you'd left," Lady Christabel spoke, and before I could answer, Lord Madison cut in, "She was with me," he said and placed a kiss on Lady Christabel's cheek. "Oh," Lady Christabel said and nodded. "I'm taking her home," he spoke and surprisingly wrapped his left hand around my waist, causing my body to turn numb. "Stay still," he instructed through the mind link, and I obeyed. "Let's go," he spoke out loud and led me away, but as we walked away, I caught Alpha Leo's gaze, which had an unreadable expression. "Don't hold his gaze," he instructed through telepathy, and quickly, I averted my gaze. We left the sitting room, and I was expecting him to let go of my waist, but he didn't. Rather, he held it until we got to the car. With stunned eyes, I watched him open the door for me and then let go of me. "Go in," he urged when he noticed I was hesitating to go in. "In," he demanded, and with a gulp, I entered the car, and he shut the door before going over to the driver's seat. "Are you sure about this?" Lolita asked as he started up the car. "Will his plan work?" she asked, and I didn't give a response. "What are you thinking?" he asked, while his gaze was fixed on the road. "It's nothing," I said, and I was grateful he didn't ask further. The drive was silent until he pulled up in front of our building. "Thanks," I spoke, and he nodded while not looking my way. I went out of the car, and just when I was about to close the door, he asked me to wait up. I watched him come out of the car and walk over to my side of the car. "I want to meet the other members of your family," he spoke, and my eyes widened in shock. "You?" I trailed off and gulped. "Yes, I want to meet them." "Is there a problem with it?" he asked, and I shook my head. "Not really. It's just that Mom and Dad would be asleep by now," I lied. I couldn't let him meet my mother. I didn't want him to know about the challenges I was facing at home. I noticed he held my gaze for a moment, like he was reading through me, before saying, "I have rules." He spoke while holding my gaze with an intense look. "Number 1 rule, you will do exactly as I tell you. And the second rule, you will never lie to me. So I ask again, is something wrong?" he demanded, and I couldn't respond. "I hate to be ignored," he warned, and I gulped before responding. "Mother and I have not been on good terms for as long as I can remember. She hates me and doesn't cease to show it," I whispered, making sure to avoid his gaze. "Throughout my life, I kept wondering why she hates me so much, and a few days ago, she opened up and told me everything." I paused and gulped. "What did she say?" he asked with so much concern in his voice. "When I was just 4, she left Vera and me in the car to go get something. I left the car and walked onto a busy road, and in the attempt to run to me, she got hit by a car, lost her pregnancy, and womb in the process." I gulped and threw back the tears that stood in my eyes. I can't even remember any of it. I managed to choke out between sobs, stopping myself from crying before Lord Madison. "Close your eyes," he demanded, and I held his gaze with a confused look. "Remember the first rule," he reminded me, and I nodded, taking a deep breath. As I closed my eyes, I felt his presence drawing closer. Suddenly, his warm hands were on my cheeks, and I gasped in surprise. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, I felt his lips pressed against mine. "Open your mouth," he telepathically instructed me, and despite my confusion, my body obeyed his command. I parted my lips slightly, allowing him to deepen the kiss as his tongue explored my mouth. I felt a surge of desire and intense heat, and I couldn't believe how much I loved the feeling of his lips on mine. My worries fell away, and all that existed in that moment was the two of us. His kiss was all-consuming, and I wanted nothing more than to stay in this moment forever. As we finally pulled apart, I opened my eyes to gaze at him, feeling a mix of confusion and desire. It was as if I had just woken up from a dream, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted to dive back into it or pull away and run. "That was to lighten up your mood," he spoke with an unreadable expression on his face. "Oh," I whispered, feeling a strange discomfort in my chest. What was I thinking? "Go in, someone is waiting for you," he said, and I turned around to see Maxwell standing by the door with folded arms. "Thanks," I said, "I know, I'm a good kisser," he teased and walked back to the car, while I stood and watched him drive off. "What was that?" Lolita asked. "What?" I asked. "You know what I mean," she demanded, but I didn't respond. "I hope you know what you are doing," she cautioned, while I ignored her and walked to the door where Maxwell was waiting. "What did you see?" I asked and nervously licked my lips. "Everything. I saw everything," he spoke while throwing a questioning gaze at me. "I know you have a lot to ask." I sighed and rested my head on his chest. "But can I tell you all about it in the morning?" I pleaded, and he went silent for a moment before humming. "Are you hungry?" he asked, and I shook my head. "I just want to go to bed," I grumbled and left his chest. "Good night." He kissed my forehead and led me inside the house. I took the stairs to my room, took a bath, and lay on the bed with my mind drifting to Lord Madison's plan. I was curious about his plans and what he would make me do, but at the same time, I was excited about it. "Just hope this works," Lolita grumbled, and I let out a soft sigh before drifting off to bed. The next morning I had no lecture, so I dressed up for the mansion. I took the stairs to the sitting room and met everyone in the dining room. "Good morning," I greeted and made my way to the door. "Aren't you staying for breakfast?" Maxwell asked, but I politely declined. "I'll grab something on my way," I responded, "but Father cut in, we are having breakfast as a family," he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. How could he expect me to sit at a table with people who despised me? With a deep breath, I spoke. "Well, I don't see myself as a member of this family," I said firmly while holding my father's gaze. "I have a mother who hates me, a sister who wants nothing but to see me in pain, and a father who wouldn't believe his own daughter. Indeed, this is not family to me." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the room, feeling a heavy weight lift off my chest. I took a taxi and arrived at the mansion, taking the keys from Lady Emma and heading straight to the library. Just as I was closing the door, Alpha Leo entered the room. He closed the door behind him and pinned me against the wall, his piercing gaze demanding an explanation. "What were you doing in his room last night?" he asked, his tone accusing. My heart raced as I tried to compose myself. I was looking for something," I stammered, my mind racing to come up with a possible excuse. But Alpha Leo was not fooled. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned in closer. "Don't lie to me," he growled. "I can smell his scent on you when you both came downstairs." Alpha Leo's POV throughout the night, I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about Nora being with Madison. I was restless and couldn't wait to confront her about it. When I ask a question, I demand an answer, I yelled at her, and she shook her head, terrified by my behavior. "Speak," I demanded, but she couldn't form any words, proving my assumption was correct. "They did kiss." "Mine." Ethan growled in jealousy, sending another wave of anger through my entire body. With gritted teeth, I asked, "Are you so desperate for a man's touch and attention? Do you want to be seen as AW*E? I continued with jealousy as tears started to gather in her eyes. She yelled back, "I'm not AW*E, trying to move away from my grip, but I pinned her firmly to the wall. "Stay away from him," I demanded, releasing her from my grip. Watching tears roll down her cheek broke my heart. She took a deep breath before holding my gaze and speaking challengingly. "With all due respect, Alpha Leo, you have no right to ask me to stay away from anyone. I didn't say a word when you decided to showcase my sister to everyone as your mate, so I believe you have no right to control my life. I'm your alpha and mate." I paused, running my fingers through my hair. "I'm not your mate, Alpha Leo. My sister is your mate, not me." "You said it yourself," she responded while holding my gaze with anger and pain. My words stuck in my mouth, and I became ashamed of myself. "Excuse me, Alpha Leo. I have a lot to do," she said, lowering her head and walking towards her desk. Feeling defeated, I left the library and took the stairs to the sitting room. I strolled to the bar, took out a bottle of whiskey and a glass, then returned to the couch. I filled up my glass and gulped a large quantity into my mouth. With a heavy sigh, I closed my eyes, and images of Lord Madison and Nora kissing played in my head. No matter how hard I tried to shake those pictures from my head, they wouldn't go away. Instead, they kept replaying like a movie in my mind. The hurried footsteps from the stairs made me open my eyes and move my gaze to the stairs. I saw Nora hurriedly descending the stairs. "Mine," Ethan howled in my head, causing a heavy sigh to leave my lips. "Alpha," she paused and looked around like she was searching for someone. "Is something wrong?" I asked, and she shook her head. "Is just that I was hoping to get the day off. I know it's too sudden, but I totally forgot today is the last day of the month," she said in a pleading tone while holding my gaze with pleading eyes. Obviously, wherever she wants to be, it's really important to her. "Where are you going?" I demanded, and she gulped before speaking. "I do voluntarily service at an orphanage, please let me go. I can't miss it, the children will be heartbroken," she pleaded, holding my gaze with those eyes that I couldn't say no to. "I will let you go on one condition," I said, standing up and taking a step towards her. "I will let you go, but only if I go with you," I said, not believing I was saying such a thing. "Do you want to come with me?" Nora asked, raising her eyebrows. "Yes," I responded and took a step towards her. "How do I know you're not lying just to meet with him, since Lord Madison is not in the mansion?" I spoke with a hint of jealousy. "That's ridiculous, Alpha Leo." Nora paused and took a deep breath. "Fine, you can come with me," she spoke with a big frown on her face that I did not pay attention to. "Emma," I called through the mind link, and she responded. "Come to the living room," I said and emptied my drink while Nora held my gaze, wondering what I was up to. Emma walked into the sitting room and lowered her head respectfully. "You sent for me?" "Yes, I'm giving Nora a day off," I said, and she nodded. "Thanks," Nora spoke gratefully and handed the keys to Emma. "Let's go," I said and led the way out of the sitting room, with Nora following behind, making sure to give me enough space. We went to the garage, and I took the keys from my driver and got into the driver's side. I noticed she hesitated for a moment before getting in. As I drove out of the mansion, I couldn't comprehend what was happening to me. Ever since I noticed Madison's interest in her, I couldn't help but become curious about Nora. I knew there was more to her for Madison to have an interest in her, and I was keen to discover it myself. The orphanage is opposite the town mall, she said, and I nodded. The drive was oddly silent, and I wished she could talk more to me like she does with Madison. After a 5-minute drive, I drove into a black gate, which was indeed an orphanage I never knew existed in the pack. I believe you now see it's an orphanage, but thanks for dropping me. She slightly lowered her head and got out of the car. I watched her walk into the orphanage without looking back. With a sigh, I rested my head on the headrest of the car. So many thoughts were buzzing in my head, and I couldn't shake them off. With a groan, I turned off the engine of the car and stepped out. I moved my gaze around the orphanage and realized it was indeed a small building. Having no idea what I was doing, I walked into the orphanage and moved my gaze around. I saw Nora surrounded by a group of excited children. They hugged her tightly, jumping up and down with joy. Nora was laughing loudly along with them. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her before, a free, uninhibited laugh that seemed to come from deep within her. Nora seemed like a reserved person, often keeping to herself. But seeing her now, surrounded by these children, it was clear that she had a special connection with them. As she noticed my presence, she turned to hold my gaze. Her expression was a mix of surprise and confusion, as if she wasn't expecting to see me there. "Alpha Leo, what are you doing here?" she asked, breaking away from the children and walking over to me. I paused and thought of an excuse. "I want to be sure you don't leave after I leave," I spoke and saw her scoff before shaking her head. "Be our guest then," she respectfully lowered her head and went back to the kids. With my arms folded, I took a seat, and a caregiver approached me with a look of confusion mixed with curiosity. "Alpha Leonardo?" she asked, and I nodded with a sigh. I didn't think anyone would recognize me here. "Oh my goodness, greetings," she exclaimed, bringing the attention of the other caregivers to us. "Alpha Leo is here. Children, come and pay your respects," she said, and all the children and caregivers rushed over to me, respectfully lowering their heads. I held Nora's gaze, who didn't seem pleased with my presence. "Thank you for having me. Please treat me as a normal visitor." "I don't want any formalities," I urged, and they all nodded with excitement. "It's a privilege to have you in our midst," a child of about 8 years spoke with so much excitement in her voice, and I responded with a smile. "What they said about you is true." The little girl spoke with a big smile. "What do they say about me?" I asked with raised eyebrows. "That you're really handsome," she spoke, and I chuckled before gently caressing her left cheek. "Thank you," I said, and she lowered her head. "Let's go, kids. We have a lot to do," Nora spoke, and they all nodded before leaving with her. I watched as they spread mats on the floor and all sat down, while Nora sat before them with a novel in her hands. As I observed Nora interacting with the children, I couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. It was clear that she had a big heart and a special way of connecting with people. In that moment, I realized that I had truly never known her. As I continued to watch from my seat, I could see the children's faces light up as Nora read to them, using different voices and gestures to bring the story to life. They were fully engaged and eager to participate in the activity she had planned for them. I could tell that Nora had a talent for communicating with kids, something I had never noticed before. As the session came to an end, the children gathered around Nora, asking her questions and expressing their gratitude for the time they spent together. Nora smiled warmly at them and gave each one a hug before sending them off to their next activity. As the children left, Nora turned to me and asked, "You're still here? What were you thinking?" I responded in a challenging tone. Nora shrugged her shoulders before standing up. Remember, I'm not leaving until nightfall, so be my guest. She walked through a door while I remained in my seat, with no plans to leave. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.